The encrypted message came through at 3:47 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon in late January. Barry Pollock stared at his laptop screen in the MDC Brooklyn attorney conference room, reading the words 3 times to make sure he understood correctly. Then he looked up at Nicolás Maduro, who sat across the gray metal table in his wrinkled khaki federal prison uniform, and said something he'd never expected to say to a client facing life imprisonment. "Nicolás, the White House wants to make a deal." Maduro's dark brown eyes narrowed. The 62-year-old former Venezuelan president had learned to be suspicious of everything in American custody: the food, the guards, the other inmates, even his own cellmate. But the word deal cut through his defensive instincts like a blade. His weathered hands with thick fingers stopped fidgeting with the plastic coffee cup. His distinctive, thick, dark gray mustache twitched slightly as he processed what his attorney had just said. What kind of deal? His voice was careful, controlled. A lifetime in politics had taught him that deals always came with hidden costs. Pollock turned the laptop around so Maduro could see the screen. The message had come through a secure channel, not official government email, but a private communication line that high-level Washington operators used when they wanted to keep things off the record. The sender was identified only as WH Senior Advisor, but the message's contents made clear it had approval from the very top. Maduro leaned forward, his round face catching the harsh fluorescent light as he read. His medium dark brown skin looked pale in the artificial illumination, stress lines deepening around his eyes with each sentence. His short gray-black hair, unwashed for days, stuck up at odd angles as he unconsciously ran his hand through it while reading. The proposal was straightforward in its audacity. Subject will appear on CNN for live 60-minute interview. Subject will make following statements: 1. Acknowledge drug trafficking operations during tenure as president. 2. Admit to authoritarian governance and human rights violations. 3. Express remorse for actions. 4. State that U.S. intervention was justified. In exchange, all federal charges dropped. Subject released to Mexican custody for permanent exile. Family members permitted to join. Process can be completed within 72 hours of compliance. Maduro read it twice. Then he stood up so abruptly that his plastic chair flew backward, clattering against the concrete floor with a sound like a gunshot. The guard outside glanced through the reinforced window but didn't enter. "They want me to confess." Maduro's voice rose, his Venezuelan accent thickening with emotion. "They want me to go on television and lie. Say I'm guilty of crimes I didn't commit." "Nicolás, sit down. Let's talk about this rationally." "Rationally?" Maduro's fists clenched at his sides, his prison ID wristband visible on his left wrist. "There is nothing rational about this. They invade my country, shoot my wife, kidnap me, and now they want me to validate their crimes by confessing to things I didn't do. They're offering you freedom." Pollock's voice was measured, professional, complete freedom. "You walk out of here, you go to Mexico, Cilia joins you, you live the rest of your life as a free man, as a free liar." Maduro was pacing now, his khaki prison uniform rustling with each agitated step in the small conference room. "As a man who sold his integrity for comfort, do you understand what this means? If I say those words on CNN, history will remember me as a drug trafficker who admitted his guilt. Venezuela will remember me as a dictator who confessed. Everything I fought for, everything I believed in, erased by one television interview. Or," Pollock said quietly, "you refuse the deal and spend the rest of your life in this prison. You never see Cilia except through prison visiting room glass. You die in a federal cell, and history remembers you as the Venezuelan president who was captured and imprisoned by the United States. Is that better?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Maduro stopped pacing, his back to Pollock, staring at the small barred window that offered a glimpse of gray Brooklyn sky. His weathered hands gripped the window frame, knuckles white with tension. "How long do I have to decide?" His voice was barely above a whisper now. "They want an answer by Monday. That gives you 4 days. 4 days to choose between my freedom and my honor. Maduro turned back to face his attorney, his dark brown eyes carrying a weight that went beyond personal suffering. Do you know what my father told me when I was young? He was a union organizer, a working man who fought for dignity. He said, "Nicolás, you can lose everything in this life. Your money, your position, your health. But the one thing no one can take from you is your integrity, unless you give it away." Your father never spent 20 years in federal prison, Pollock said gently. I'm not telling you what to decide. But I need you to understand what you're choosing between. This isn't abstract philosophy. This is your actual life. Maduro returned to his chair, sitting heavily. He picked up the plastic coffee cup with both hands, as if the lukewarm liquid could provide some kind of answer. Tell me what happens if I refuse. Pollock consulted his notes. Trial probably starts in 6 months. Based on the charges and the evidence they claim to have, you're looking at conviction on multiple counts. Sentencing would be 25 to life, minimum. Given your age and health, that effectively means you die in prison. And if I accept, what are the mechanics? According to the message, you'd be transported to a secure location, probably a studio they control. CNN would send a team. But the interview would be conducted under conditions the White House dictates. You read from a prepared statement, answer scripted questions, express remorse. The whole thing is recorded, broadcast that evening. Within hours, charges are dropped. You're released to Mexican authorities. Cilia is brought from her hospital, and you both disappear into comfortable exile. Comfortable exile built on a foundation of lies. Maduro set down the coffee cup. What does Mexico get out of this? Why would they agree to harbor me? Mexico doesn't want a destabilized Venezuela on their geopolitical doorstep. They'd probably welcome a deal that removes you from the equation without making you a martyr. You'd live there quietly, no political activity, essentially under house arrest but with freedom of movement within the country. Maduro was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked the question that had been forming since he first read the message. Why? Why does Trump want this? He won. He captured me. He can prosecute me, humiliate me in court, claim victory. Why offer me an escape? Pollock had been thinking about this too. Because the Venezuela operation is failing. The oil companies won't invest. The puppet government is struggling. International criticism is mounting. Trump needs to change the narrative. If you confess, if you validate his actions by admitting you were everything he said you were, then suddenly the invasion looks justified. You become the proof that he was right all along. I become his propaganda tool. Essentially, yes. Maduro stood again, but this time slowly, deliberately. I need to think about this. I need time. You have 4 days. But Nicolás, I need you to seriously consider. I know what you need me to consider. Maduro's voice was firm but not angry. You need me to consider that I'm 62 years old, that my wife is recovering from gunshot wounds, that every day in this place takes something from me. I know the practical arguments, but there are other considerations too. Like what? Like what message this sends to everyone who resisted American imperialism. Like what it means for Venezuela's future. Like whether some things are more important than personal comfort. Maduro moved toward the door, signaling he was ready to return to his cell. I'll give you an answer Monday morning. But I already know what my father would say. That night, lying on his 2-inch mattress in cell 247 of MDC Brooklyn, Nicolás Maduro couldn't sleep. His cellmate Rodriguez was snoring softly in the bunk below, but Maduro's mind was racing through scenarios, arguments, memories. He thought about Cilia. The last time he'd seen her, really seen her, not through prison visiting room glass, was in that hospital bed, her shoulder wrapped in bandages, pain medication making her eyes unfocused. She'd tried to be strong for him, had whispered "Te amo" as the guards pulled him away. If he took this deal, he could be with her again, really be with her, hold her, comfort her, spend whatever years they had left together instead of separated by prison walls and visiting hour restrictions. But he also remembered other moments. Standing in front of the Venezuelan National Assembly, defending his government's policies, meeting with community organizers in the barrios, listening to their hopes for a better future. The night Hugo Chavez had told him, "Nicolás, the revolution isn't about us. It's about what we represent to people who have nothing. We can't betray that." The confession the White House wanted wasn't just words. It was validation of their entire worldview. It would be used to justify not just what they'd done to Venezuela, but what they might do to other countries. Cuba, Nicaragua, Bolivia, anywhere that didn't align with American interests. His confession would become a tool for justifying future interventions. But did that matter more than his actual life? Than Cilia's recovery? Than the chance, slim though it might be, to live some years in peace? Around 2 a.m., Maduro climbed down from his bunk as quietly as possible and stood at the small barred window. Brooklyn at night was never truly dark. Light pollution from the city created a permanent orange glow against the clouds. Somewhere out there, in a hospital bed, Cilia was probably awake too, wondering what would become of them. "Yo te amo, mi amor," he whispered to the night. "Lo siento mucho." He thought about the mechanics of the confession. They'd give him a script, tell him exactly what to say, how to look remorseful, how to express gratitude that America had freed the Venezuelan people from his tyranny. They'd probably have him praise Delcy Rodriguez, the woman they'd installed as their puppet president. They'd make him complicit in his own humiliation. And then what? Life in Mexico? Under surveillance? Certainly. His every move watched, his communications monitored. Unable to speak freely or engage in politics, it would be a gilded cage, comfortable but constrained. Was that really freedom? But was this? He looked around his cell, at the concrete walls, the metal toilet, the tiny sink. Was this better? At least in Mexico, he could walk in sunshine, eat real food, make love to his wife, wake up next to her instead of to a guard's flashlight and morning head count. Maduro pressed his forehead against the cold metal bars. His distinctive, thick, dark gray mustache brushed against the steel. In his entire political career spanning decades, he'd never felt this trapped. He'd faced coups, economic sanctions, assassination attempts, but those were external threats. This was different. This was a choice that would define not just his remaining years, but his legacy. "Papa," he said softly, addressing his long-dead father. "¿Qué hago? What do I do?" His father, if he were alive, would probably tell him that honor wasn't about comfortable choices, that integrity mattered precisely when it cost you something, that some things were worth suffering for. But his father had never been shot at by American special forces, had never watched his wife take a bullet, had never faced life in a foreign prison system, designed to break men's spirits. Around 4 a.m., exhausted but still unable to sleep, Maduro climbed back into his bunk. He'd made no decision yet. The choice still hung in front of him, equally weighted, impossibly complex. Friday passed in a blur of routine. Breakfast at 6 a.m., runny eggs and cold toast. Recreation yard time at 9 a.m. Maduro walked alone, avoiding conversation. Lunch at noon, something that was theoretically chicken. Afternoon in the common area, he sat in a corner with a book he didn't read, just turning pages randomly. Dinner at 5 p.m., beef stew that tasted like salty regret. Back to his cell by 7 p.m. Rodriguez tried to engage him in conversation, but Maduro was unresponsive. His mind was elsewhere, cycling through the same arguments, the same memories, the same impossible choice. Saturday brought a surprise. A special visit was authorized, not with Pollock, but with a Catholic priest, Father Miguel, an elderly Hispanic clergyman who served as chaplain for the facility, sat with Maduro in a small interview room. "I understand you're facing a difficult decision," Father Miguel said gently. His accent was Mexican, his eyes kind. "How do you know about that?" Maduro asked suspiciously. "Your attorney requested I speak with you. He didn't tell me specifics, only that you were struggling with a moral dilemma. I'm here only to listen, if you want to talk." Maduro studied the priest's face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. He found none. Just an old man who'd probably heard 10,000 confessions and offered 10,000 prayers. Father, can a lie ever be moral? If it serves a greater good, your freedom, your family's welfare, can falsehood be justified? Father Miguel was quiet for a moment. The Catholic Church has wrestled with this question for centuries. There are theories of moral complexity, of proportionality, of choosing the lesser evil. But I think you already know the answer, Nicolás. You're not asking me because you don't know what's right. You're asking me because you're hoping I'll give you permission to do what's easier. The words hit like a slap. Maduro felt his eyes burning. What if doing what's right means destroying my life? My wife's life? What if honor is just another word for prideful suffering? Then you suffer. Father Miguel said simply, I can't tell you that's fair. I can't tell you God will reward you. I can only tell you that we don't get to choose our crucifixions. We only choose how we face them. That's easy to say when you're not the one being crucified. You're right. It is easy to say. The priest stood, preparing to leave. But I'll tell you something else. I've been a prison chaplain for 30 years. I've sat with men who confessed to crimes they didn't commit because prosecutors offered deals. I've watched them get their freedom, walk out of prison, return to their families. And you know what? Most of them came back, not to prison, but to visit me, because they couldn't live with what they'd done. Because a life built on fundamental dishonesty becomes its own kind of prison. After Father Miguel left, Maduro sat alone in that room for another hour, until guards came to escort him back to his cell. The priest's words echoed in his mind. A life built on fundamental dishonesty becomes its own kind of prison. Sunday morning arrived with crystalline clarity. Maduro woke before the bell, finally knowing what his answer would be. It wasn't a logical decision. It didn't come from weighing pros and cons. It came from something deeper, something his father had tried to teach him, something he'd almost forgotten during all his years in power when compromises and calculations had become second nature. Some things couldn't be negotiated. When Pollock arrived Monday morning at 9 a.m. sharp, Maduro was already in the conference room waiting. His attorney looked tired, probably had spent the weekend preparing arguments for either scenario. So, Pollock asked, setting down his briefcase, what's your decision? Maduro met his attorney's eyes with an expression of complete calm. His dark brown eyes carried no doubt, no hesitation. Tell the White House I reject their offer. Pollock had been prepared for this, but hearing it still made him pause. Nicolás, are you absolutely certain? Because once I communicate this, I'm certain. Maduro's voice was steady. Tell them I would rather die in American prison as an innocent man than live free as a false criminal. Tell them they can take my freedom, but they can't buy my integrity. Tell them no deal. They're offering you everything. They're offering me nothing. Maduro interrupted gently. What they're offering isn't freedom. It's a different kind of cage. A comfortable one, yes, but still a cage, and the price of entry is my soul. He stood up, his khaki prison uniform wrinkling as he moved. I've made my choice. My father would understand. My wife will understand. History will decide if it mattered. But at least when I die, whether it's in this prison or somewhere else, I'll die as myself, not as their puppet. Pollock studied his client's face, looking for cracks in the resolve. He found none. Okay, I'll communicate your refusal. But Nicolás, I need you to understand what you're choosing. Life imprisonment. No chance of, I understand. Maduro smiled, then a real smile that transformed his round face, his distinctive, thick, dark gray mustache lifting at the corners. For the first time in weeks, Barry, I actually understand something clearly. They thought they could buy me. They thought everyone has a price. But some things aren't for sale. Later that afternoon, Pollock sent the encrypted response. Subject declines proposed arrangement. Subject requests full trial on all charges. Maintains innocence and will contest every allegation. No further negotiations requested or authorized. The reaction in the White House was swift and shocked. According to sources who would later leak details to the press, President Trump was genuinely bewildered. He turned it down. He chose prison over freedom. What kind of idiot does that? A senior advisor tried to explain, "Mr. President, Maduro is ideologically committed. He sees this as a matter of principle." Principle? He's facing life in prison. Principle doesn't matter when you're dying in a cage. But Maduro had proven something that the White House hadn't anticipated. That not everyone could be bought, bribed, or broken. That some people valued their integrity more than their comfort. That sometimes, the most powerful act of resistance was simply refusing to cooperate with your own humiliation. Back in his cell that evening, Maduro felt lighter than he had in weeks. Rodriguez noticed the change. "Man, you look different. Something happened." "I made a decision," Maduro replied. "I chose myself." "What does that mean?" "It means they offered me a deal to get out of here. And I said no." Rodriguez stared at him like he'd grown a second head. "You COs to stay in prison? Are you crazy?" "Maybe." Maduro lay down on his bunk, hands behind his head, staring at the concrete ceiling. "Or maybe I'm finally sane. They wanted me to confess to crimes I didn't commit. To go on television and validate everything they did to my country, and I realized something. That's not a deal. That's surrender. And I'm not ready to surrender." "But you could be free, could I? Or would I just be a different kind of prisoner, living in Mexico, monitored, controlled, having to watch them use my confession to justify their actions forever? At least here, I'm still myself. I haven't given them the satisfaction of breaking me." Rodriguez shook his head in wonder. "I don't know if you're the bravest man I've ever met, or the stupidest." "Probably both," Maduro admitted. "But it's my choice. And that matters." That night, for the first time since his capture, Nicolás Maduro slept peacefully. The 2-inch mattress didn't feel as uncomfortable. The cell didn't feel as small, because somewhere in the process of refusing their deal, he'd reclaimed something essential, his sense of who he was. He dreamed of Venezuela, not the political struggles or the economic crisis, but the simple beauty of it. The mountains around Caracas, the Caribbean coast, the sound of Spanish, spoken with Venezuelan rhythm. He dreamed of Cilia, not in a hospital bed or prison visiting room, but as she'd been years ago, laughing at something he'd said, her eyes bright with life. In the morning, when the 6 a.m. bell rang and another day of incarceration began, Maduro faced it with something he hadn't felt in weeks: dignity. They could imprison his body, but they couldn't make him lie. They could control his circumstances, but they couldn't control his character. The White House's offer had been a test, not of his pragmatism or his survival instincts, but of his fundamental understanding of himself. And he'd passed it, not by being clever or strategic, but by being honest. Sometimes the strongest weapon isn't guns or money or political power. It's simply the truth. Your truth, your integrity, your refusal to become someone else's narrative. And in a cold Brooklyn prison cell, that truth became Nicolás Maduro's freedom, even as the physical bars remained locked.